Hey, everybody, it's Natalie. I want to talk about something today that I'm sure many of you have been talking about. If you didn't watch the Oscars on Sunday night, then you probably have seen the replay of what happened between Will Smith and Chris Rock. You're going to see my dear friend here, Dr. Angela Wall. Angie texted me the other night and said, I really feel like we need to talk about this topic, and I 100% agree, and that is normalizing violence. Dr. Wall, thanks for taking the time today to go live here. We are on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You know, it's a big topic because in Will Smith's eyes, he thought he was defending his wife who suffers from alopecia and hair loss. And he was very offended by a joke that Chris Rock made on stage. So how did you feel about this, Dr. Wall, when you saw it? And what is the topic you feel like we really need to address?
Well, thanks, Natalie. It's so good to see you, by the way. I literally wept, and I was not watching the Oscars when it happened, but the first thing I saw, like everybody else, on Monday morning was a replay of this scene. And I was so honestly traumatized on so many different levels, on a personal level, on a professional level as a psychologist, and on another level, just as a woman watching that. And I'm going to tell you why. I have seen in my practice, and I also work in the schools, since we've come out of the COVID, so much angry and aggressive behavior that I've never seen before. I think we're seeing all the smash and grabs on TV where people are robbing places. We're seeing random acts of violence on the street where people are just getting hit. And on top of that, what I'm hearing a lot, and the research that I've been reading is there was a huge increase in domestic violence during the pandemic, when people were locked in such close quarters and the parents were frustrated about, their economic situation. They were closed in with kids and trying to homeschool kids. And there was a huge increase in domestic violence. So my first impression when I saw that and my heart just broke was, oh my gosh, these kids are seeing this. Yeah. Their hero.
Yeah, right.
I mean, they're both heroes, Chris Rock and, Will Smith. They're seeing their hero break down and engage in an act of violence. And it just shattered me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then in his defense, people have said, Will Smith's defense, he again was defending his wife whom he loves and his heart hurt. So one thing I want to talk to you about is dealing with that kind of anger and fear from him. I mean, we all know what it feels like when someone you loved has been violated.
Right.
Feel like, how dare you say something like that? And there may be some blame on both sides here. We see a lot in comedy that is inappropriate.
Of course.
And what he did, what Chris Rock said was inappropriate, making fun of, and perhaps not intentionally, her hair loss. So let's talk about that in appropriate ways to deal with those feelings.
Absolutely. In the schools, what we see every day in the interactions that I have in schools every day are working with kids on how to manage their anger. And a lot of kids will tell you, and a lot of kids that get in trouble at school, whether it be, the younger kids or high school kids, are, I did it because, he offended me. He called my mom a name. He called my girlfriend a name. And we try to teach them at an early age. And as parents, we try to teach our kids, yes, people are going to be offensive. You are going to run into difficult people your entire life. And resorting to violence is never, ever going to be a good option. The sad thing is, you would think by the time someone reaches the age that, Will Smith is, that they would have learned those lessons. They would have learned a little bit of, self-control. But what we try to teach kids is, when you're triggered, when you become extremely angry, the first thing you need to do is just stop and breathe deeply and take a deep breath of air and just flood your entire head with oxygen and try to slow down your breathing. Because what we know is, if you're breathing slowly and evenly, you're literally sending a physiological message to your brain that everything's okay.
Yeah.
But when you start to get angry, your breathing gets really shallow, and
Mhm.
that's the message to your brain that you're in fight or flight response,
Yeah.
and you need to either run or engage in a fight, and that's exactly where Will Smith was. So what I try to work with kids on is just really focusing on slowing down and taking a breath and literally counting and giving yourself at least 10 slow breaths up to 30 and then reevaluating the situation. But in that moment, just slowing everything down is critical. It's better if you can teach anger management strategies ahead of time, because it's really difficult to teach anybody anything in the midst of a really angry moment.
And
So
on live
for our
TV,
kids,
you think of kids who I'm getting some comments now, which, by the way, anyone who has a comment or a question for Dr. Wall on this topic, feel free to drop that in the comments and we'll address them. But I had someone just write that this perhaps had been going on in Chris Rock's shows in the past, where he had made comments about Jada Pinkett Smith. And so Will Smith was already, and I have to verify this, but already on edge. They had not been friends because of this, apparently. This is what someone is saying. So, this goes into that having those things worked out in your mind, because you think of kids who are dealing with, maybe it's a bullying situation or it's something else, and they're almost walking into a room or a situation preparing with that fight or flight of, this is going to happen, what am I going to do? And they act out of fear instead of a good knowledge of how to handle a situation.
right. And part of living in a society is that we know when we're going into a situation that there's going to be consequences if
Right.
we do that. Ultimately, that's what manages our behavior. As parents, as our kids are growing up, we discipline them not to be mean, but to teach them how to behave in society, because we know that if they do something like that in society, there's going to be consequences. The saddest part of the whole situation for me was looking around and seeing that there was no response from the people around him that would be typical. I mean, I was shocked. I
It
was
almost
I
felt,
mean,
didn't it feel like it was part of the act? With no one
um,
doing anything, it felt like, was this set up? I mean, when I first saw it, I thought, "Wait a minute, was this a setup? No one's doing anything. Wait, this is a joke," right? Like, it didn't feel real.
perhaps, and I'd like to give everyone the benefit of the doubt that that's what they were thinking, that this wasn't real. But it certainly was a very real hit, and it struck me that, um, well, and perhaps, and this is 100% just my opinion watching it. And once again, I was very concerned about how it might trigger younger people and victims of domestic violence. But it really seemed like he had hit people before. I
Mm,
mean, just in the manner that he approached him casually and all of a sudden wound up and struck him so quickly so that he didn't have the opportunity to defend himself.
mm.
That's what struck me. It looked very real to me. And again, I'm very in tune to situations with domestic violence, but I am sure there's people in that audience that were quite triggered and re-traumatized by watching that.
Yeah, I've
And
heard.
it just shocked me, and it shocked me that he was allowed to stay and accept an award, and people applauded. It was shocking, and that's why when we're talking about normalizing violence, oh my goodness, it was a very significant event psychologically. I think if we look at it that way, I know people are talking about the ins and outs and the dynamics of it, but the whole situation was very disturbing, very, very disturbing.
What do you think is the message we need to send now? I mean, who knows what the academy will do? It sounds as if they're discussing their options. But what do you think needs to happen and what discussions need to take place? Obviously, we're having this discussion today, but with each other, what are the discussions you think we need to be having, and with our kids?
I think it's a great opportunity to discuss with our kids the importance of kindness and respecting others, even when we disagree with them, and resolving things in a way that leaves us with a sense of dignity and integrity.
Mhm.
And despite what we encounter, that we can approach situations with dignity and integrity. There's so much violence in the world today, and teaching our kids that no matter what's going on in the world, this is how our family behaves, or this is how we expect you to behave. And we never resort to violence under any circumstances.
Yeah.
Um, just, teaching a value of kindness and effective problem solving and just a sense of dignity.
Yeah. Yeah. Even when wronged. I mean, there will be cases where someone says something completely wrong, completely untrue, or that's very, very hurtful,
Of
especially
course.
when it's someone you love, when it's your
Yeah.
spouse, even your children.
Right. And we have all been wronged, and our kids will be wronged, and that's when it's the hardest. They always say integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. Well, it's also doing the right thing when you've been deeply wronged, and maintaining yourself and knowing who you are and knowing what kind of person you are is a lesson that we need to teach our kids. And we do that, of course, and my message is always by example as parents.
Yeah.
And I think our kids really watch us when we're in difficult situations, whether it's in the grocery store or in traffic. Our kids are always watching us and seeing how we deal with situations where we're wronged. Whether it's somebody cuts us off in traffic, do we lose our cool? Or are we able to take a deep breath and say, okay, stuff like this happens.
Yeah.
We set a good example for our kids, and that's how they learn most of all. Even, we love to have conversations with our kids, and I encourage it, but mostly they're watching us and how we're behaving,
That's so true. That how we're modeling that every single day
every day.
and how we treat people, from the clerk at the store to people on the street. I did have someone ask a question. At what point and how far do we allow our kids to be bullied or victimized before they have to put a stop to it? Seems to be an issue for kids in schools. Now we're off topic a little bit, but I think we're still dealing with this feeling of
Of being wronged.
being wronged. Yeah.
And being targeted. Well, from working in the schools, the best rule of thumb is, bullying should not go on, and kids need to be told that if they're being bullied, they are not to keep it to themselves. They need to tell a trusted adult, and the sooner they tell a trusted adult, the better. If they're being bullied at school, they need to find someone and tell them immediately so the situation can be taken care of. They shouldn't carry it and go home with it. The sooner they can let somebody know, the better, because I know personnel at school are very invested in resolving this bullying crisis, but they can't do anything about it unless they know.
Yeah.
So if we can tell our kids, if something is happening, tell someone right away. And it's not tattling. I mean, some of these bullies need some help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, the child should never be pushed to the point where they're feeling like they have to physically defend themselves against a bully. If somebody touches your child or hurts your child, that's a problem, and that's an assault, and that needs to be dealt with school personnel immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. As a school counselor, a school psychologist, I should say, and I know you have your own private practice too, are you seeing more issues today than you have in the last 10, 20 years? I know you've been in the profession for a long time.
100%. We talked a little bit about this. Kids are coming back to school after basically being out for 2 years. And not only do they have a 2-year academic deficit, they have a 2-year social skills deficit.
Mm.
So we're seeing our youngest kids coming back to school with missing 2 years of learning how to problem solve with other kids face to face.
Yeah.
We're seeing our older kids, our high school kids, coming back to school with absolutely missing the skills necessary to even manage minor stressful situations, let alone huge stressful situations. And it's a huge mental health crisis right now. And what I mentioned earlier, a lot of kids are coming from situations where they saw an increase in domestic violence in their home. They're coming from very stressful home situations. Their parents might have lost jobs. They might have lost relatives because of the COVID. They might have had literal, deaths in the family.
Mhm.
And so they're coming back, and there's been a lot of trauma, and we're seeing so much more just anger, frustration, anxiety, and tons of depression in the schools.
What advice would you give to people? I mean, we're a little bit off topic from what we normally, what we said we were going to talk about just in the Will Smith situation and normalizing violence, but it all plays into where we are in society right now, coming out of a very difficult couple of years with depression. What advice would you have for people who are just feeling overwhelmed, and sometimes that does come out in a violent way?
My best suggestion would be to understand that you're not alone, that everyone is experiencing this, that you're not the only one that's struggling with coming back after the pandemic, to give yourself a break,
Mm.
um, to take care of yourself, to engage in a lot of self care, and to seek out some support and some help from a therapist or a counselor if you need it, because not everybody has the resources to do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've been fine your entire life. You've gone through this pandemic, and maybe you're an adult, and all of a sudden you feel depressed. I
Yeah.
mean, it's scary. You're not sure what to do, but there's plenty of really good professionals out there and skilled therapists that can help you through it. Um, and just know that you're not alone. That so many people, it's happening to so many people.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens now with this Will Smith and Chris Rock situation. And if nothing else, it's brought to the forefront some of these issues that we
Yeah.
have the opportunity to talk about today, and to tell people that violence isn't the answer. And if you need help and you're feeling triggered by something, then to seek help. Where do you tell people to go? If they're watching this right now and they're thinking, I think that's me, I'm so easily triggered, I don't know where to start. Where do I get help?
Well, there's so many resources online. I would start, I think, by, if financial resources are limited, you can start with your community mental health agency. Every community has one. That's always a good place to start.
Mm.
If you're concerned about your kids, starting with your pediatrician, I think is always a good idea. Giving them a call and saying, hey, this is going on. Do you have any recommendations for a good therapist? If you're an adult and you're more comfortable with your doctor, just call your regular family practice doctor, or, the doc that you see regularly, and ask for a referral.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time today and your insight. It means so much. And thanks for reaching out when you saw this topic and said, I think we need to talk about this. I agree. And
Absolutely.
just appreciative for you. So thanks. Anybody who wants to continue to ask questions, we'll try to answer them. And thanks for watching today.